Well, welcome everybody. I'm Russ Harrison, the Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C., joined today by three of IEEE-USA's 2021 WISE interns. The IEEE-USA WISE program is it's a 30-year-old internship program, one of the cooler programs that we run here at IEEE-USA. It's a 9-week program, traditionally in Washington, D.C., although not this year, unfortunately. We bring engineering students into Washington to interact with and learn about the policy world and the interaction between the technology world and policy. Interns receive a stipend. They're housed at George Washington University right in downtown DC, spend their summer meeting with some really impressive people in the policy world in Washington, write a research project, a sizable research project on an issue showing the intersection between technology and policy, and generally get to learn about a corner of the engineering world that a lot of people don't ever get to see. And so we're thrilled to be joined by three of our interns today. Nate Furman is from Kentucky, but he is currently a graduate student at the University of California, Irvine, working on his master's and PhD in electrical engineering. Shruti Das, who just graduated from the University of Maryland, College Park, go Terps, with her degree in computer engineering. And Kat Hefter, who is a second-year law student at the University of Pennsylvania, recent graduate of Duke University with majors in engineering and neuroscience, which is a pretty impressive background, Kat. So we get right into things and start with you. Policy is not something that engineers typically think of when they think about their future careers. You already have kind of an interesting background now that you're in law school. What caused you to look into the WISE program, and why did you think this was a good idea for a future engineer?
When I was doing engineering classes, one thing that came up over and over was we could create all of these incredible technologies, but it didn't matter if the policies that existed meant they couldn't be adopted or they could be abused in certain ways. And so I decided that I wanted to go to law school to better understand basically how did the law regulate engineering. And then I learned that's not really necessarily a matter of law so much as it is a matter of policy. The law just says what can be done, policy determines what will be done. And that was something I wasn't learning as much about in law school as I really wanted to. And the WISE program seemed the perfect opportunity to be able to learn about policy from an engineering perspective and to be able to use the amount that I learned from law school so far to kind of inform my policy decisions. And basically just to bring these two fields together in a way that would help me learn how to answer these questions of how do we make policies that allow for good science and engineering.
That's a good approach and a perspective that IEEE-USA appreciates, because we work on the intersection between technology and policy all the time. Shruti, Nate, do you have, why did you do this? What were you thinking when you decided to go this route?
Shruti, do you want to take this one for the second?
Sure. I mean, I would just like to echo everything Kat said. You know, like, policy was one of those things I hadn't even been introduced to until my senior year. I stumbled upon this program at the University of Maryland, actually, called Global Fellows, and it's meant for all majors, really, and it's meant to just introduce students interested in policy. Specifically, the program is global policy, and see how it can intersect with your field. And so taking that seminar, actually my senior year, I realized, wow, like as engineers, we're taught so little about ethics. We're taught so little about, and I know this is a conversation we've had amongst our intern cohort, is, you know, if there was more of this holistic approach towards our engineering curriculum, then maybe I think my peers as well would understand that there's so many different fields you can go into, not just, you know, the typical engineering career you might think for all the different engineering disciplines. And so that was the first time I had thought about that. And when I found WISE, I knew I wanted to do it I mean, I'm so grateful they let me, because usually internships don't allow students that aren't currently enrolled in school. So even though I've graduated, it's still meant for third and fourth year engineering students. And so that was really awesome. I was still able to, jump on this opportunity.
Yeah, and like Shruti said, I kind of stumbled upon this program at IEEE Southeast Con in Huntsville, Alabama, like 2 years ago. One of the IEEE correspondents was there, and I started to talk to her about IEEE, what programs they had, and she recommended WISE. So I'm interested in conversations that matter, conversations about policy, how engineering affects policy, how policy affects engineering, all of those topics that you don't really talk about in a whole lot of core curriculum. So it was great to hear about what WISE was, the people that did it. I'm really glad I applied and kind of got into the world of how what I'm doing in my PhD or my undergrad affects different people's ways of life. In electrical engineering, there are so many inventions, technologies that power our day-to-day living that are kind of taken for granted sometimes. So with WISE, it was great to kind of have a chance to explore in depth a very subset of that, but really a chance for that public policy and engineering to be part of one whole unit. So it was really, really cool.
Good. Well, and you mentioned something that I think is worth exploring, and that you do get kind of, through the WISE program, you do get this kind of broad exposure to Washington, D.C., but then you have an opportunity to focus on a little corner of it that you find particularly interesting. And Shruti, you did, all WISE interns do the research project. You did a particularly interesting one that I personally found fascinating and was thrilled that you looked into it, on voting technology. Could you tell us a little bit about the project, but also kind of why that was something you thought was worth your time?
Yeah. Yeah, first of all, so it was so cool just, coming into this. I know most people when they're applying to WISE already have an idea of, what they want to be researching. And so when I came to, Russ and I said, I'm really interested in voting security and voting technology, he was so helpful because he himself is really interested in this space and immediately was able to connect me to, actual voting registrar officials. And I was right off the bat able to start off my research by talking to people close to the ground on the subject. For me, what got me interested in it was, I guess, twofold. So obviously the climate. So when I was applying, it was January and we were, just about to inaugurate a new president, and just everything that went down with the last election. I think just for the average American, you kind of just feel helpless. You do your part, you vote, and then you just kind of sit there and you're like, why are public officials not getting it? And of course, I think that's like a larger discussion to which more engineers and more technical minded people will hopefully one day run for office. More of them will run for office. But I think, voting was interesting because the average American also just doesn't really even understand the mechanics of voting. And so I had been, I took a computer security class, and as engineers, you think, well, let's just throw technology at the problem sometimes. But I think voting security is actually a very interesting computer security problem. And so you ask, maybe the average computer engineer, oh, do you think we should vote online? Or do you think we should, advance our voting machines more? And they're like, absolutely not. The system in which we operate is already, it's so based on trust, and the trust is already so broken there. So adding more technology to the problem isn't the solution. And so when I had heard that and started to understand that, I realized, it's more of a policy problem. And that is where WISE was tremendous help, because I started for the first time thinking about things from a policy lens, and also kind of it started to ground my engineer kind of out there wild thoughts of, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And a lot of those issues come down to, as Nate and Kat said, the people that are using this technology. And and policy is just, it literally affects everyone. And so the United States, I think, is an incredible, it's just incredible. I think I've just gained so much respect of how we even operate, not just voting, but we have so many types of people in this country, from how they use technology, where they live, just an enormous country, to say the least. And so I think now I just have gained a lot more respect for it, and the policymakers have very hard jobs. And I think that there are some things that now I understand why they are so hard, but I also, it's also cool because I see how the younger generation, our generation, can and contribute to that conversation.
And on a related note, I did my topic on cybersecurity, a hot topic issue from a lot of the breaches recently, from Equifax, Colonial Pipeline, Solar Winds. A lot of those breaches have been really impactful for both the private and public sector. So I was really excited to work on what is wrong in that area policy-wise, what can be improved, what can change, and really get a better idea of what's going on, what can happen, what possibilities are there in that field.
Yeah. Seeing that overlap between our topics was also incredible. I think, this was mentioned a lot within our cohort. So I guess for context, there were like 5 other interns with us through different societies. And when we were giving our final presentations, I guess it was the first time we had all heard each other talk about our topics so in depth. And then we realized there's kind of just like these 3 overarching topics that kind of really intersect with engineering and policy. And I don't know if Kat or Nate, I mean, one of them was definitely security, national security. So you can think of that as cybersecurity, you can think of that as infrastructural security. And then I guess, Kat, actually yours was really intersected with, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I felt yours intersected a lot with, I think it was maybe Kennedy, and yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a lot of work on the use of triaging system, artificial intelligence for triaging systems in hospitals. Obviously, COVID has made a lot of us realize just how much thought has to go into like who gets what resources, especially in this time of scarcity. Shruti mentioned the problem of like when you have a challenging problem, you just want to throw engineering at it. And this was one of those situations where that doesn't necessarily work. But one thing that came up for me over and over, and something that the other interns, Kennedy in particular, constantly brought up, was this idea of equity. So it's not enough to have this technology. We need to make sure that the technology that we're using helps everyone and doesn't unfairly disadvantage a particular group. And that's not just plain engineering. You can't necessarily code for that. And any good policy needs to be able to consider those things.
Hi, so you're wondering why you see me here. Russ's router died, so we're going to keep going, and hopefully it won't be too much of a disruption. There he is.
My internet just was gone. I've been doing this now for a year and a half, have not had a hiccup. Now the whole thing just went down. Sorry about that.
Okay, I was just getting ready to take over for you, but I'll let you continue.
Where were we? We were talking about projects, right?
Yeah,
Kat, Nate, did you chime in yet?
Yeah, Kat just finished talking about her project on triaging and AI, which is a very exciting project.
And so, go ahead, Kat.
Oh, Shruti, I was just curious. You mentioned 3 overarching topics, and I was curious what the third one was.
Now I was trying to think about that myself now. So I think security.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's totally fine. I guess security, equity are, very important. And I like how you, tied that in. I think maybe the next would have been like scalability, or the third. Because as engineers, we're always, encouraged to think about the scalability of problems and technology. I mean, I think IEEE is like the perfect example of all of our projects. Technology is, I guess, the mechanism that allows everyone to scale whatever they're working on. But like, how do you scale? I guess this goes back to how do you scale equitably and securely, because policy, of course, is very complex, and, and I think that's what WISE taught me, just from talking to a whole array of people in this world, is, there's so many. I will never understand all the complexities of government, and so props to you, Kat, for taking classes like congressional law. But yeah, I mean, it's almost I keep thinking like it's almost a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because there are so many measures that prevent a large scale rollout that could end disastrously, but also maybe also a hindrance sometimes when you want to take action quickly and efficiently, but there again, policies there.
I'm reminded of this phrase that one of my engineering professors used to say whenever we were working on something particularly challenging. This is important, so take your time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's actually an interesting insight, Kat. The founding fathers, when they were creating the country and creating this government system, very consciously did not build a system that was fast. They very consciously built one that was slow because that makes it more thoughtful. If we can move on a little bit, the other piece of the WISE program, in addition to the being in Washington, D.C., which you guys unfortunately didn't get to experience, is experiencing the DC community. And Shruti and Kat, you just referenced this, exposing you to different ideas and different people. But you guys got to meet with some very interesting and in a few cases, very important people in Washington and have conversations with them about their jobs and what they do. Nate, I'm going to throw this to you. Give us an example of the kind of things you did and maybe an example or two of a particular meeting or particular person that was uniquely inspirational.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I want to highlight two people in particular. One was actually an IEEE person, Erica, connected me with Dan Moore. He's been in cybersecurity and electrical engineering for decades at this point. We had a great conversation on what the current state of security was at the federal, state, and local levels. What policies were really being implemented, what policies did not have much of an effect, what gaps there were. Just kind of a really, really great conversation about the background of cybersecurity. And we're kind of focused the next steps of the conversation. Because like Shruti, I kind of came in not knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I had this mindset of we want zero trust security, but what does that really mean? What policies are affected by that? And then Dan really helped kind of focus that in, really helped conversation-wise to be like, okay, this is important, this is not as important, and kind of get that bearing and perspective, which is really, really helpful. Another conversation with the whole WISE cohort was from OSHA. Tina Jones, who's the director of outreach services at the agency, presented on kind of what OSHA is, what OSHA does, how they affect small businesses, large businesses, policy, kind of a background of that department and agency. And from her conversation, I actually came up with one of my recommendations directly relating to some other consulting services. So hearing how they affected the policy in DC and influenced a lot of the people was really, really helpful, and kind of bridging some of those gaps, finding the connections was great to listen to and hear about and kind of understand. So those are two small examples. There are many more people that we met, thankfully through the WISE program. But it was great hearing both of those people talk and having conversations with them about what they did, how it relates to what I'm interested in, and trying to find some overlap.
Kat, Shruti, any other meetings that jump out at you as particularly memorable?
I definitely want to highlight the Library of Congress. We were able to meet with a lot of people there, and they were instrumental, not only helping us with research skills, but I don't think I could count on two hands the number of people that they've connected me to in a variety of other fields, people who had insight into various facets of my project that I never would have been able to meet otherwise. Also, someone from IEEE that I was able to meet, Mark Canellis. One of the problems that I've definitely been having is I know what I want to do, in that I want to work in this space of the intersection of engineering and law, but I didn't necessarily know how to do that. And Mark has been an incredible resource for that. He's on a similar path to me. He just finished getting his JD, if I remember correctly. And so he'll be a lawyer, but using his engineering background to make actual change in the way that we deal with certain kinds of evidence, which I think is just really cool. And it was wonderful to see, like, I'm not the only one trying to do this, and to be able to have these kinds of role models going forward.
You actually reminded myself and Erica of Mark a lot, which is a compliment. Mark's an impressive guy.
Yeah, I think Kat, what you mentioned about role models is like hands down, I think what I'm taking out of this program. Obviously the site visits were incredible, but the one-on-one mentorship relationships were also, just for me, really great, because I'm right now, like, I'm actually joining a full-time job as a software engineer. And so I was trying to figure out how I can navigate this corporate world with also my interest for policy. And there's really no handbook on it. Not many people kind of go down this space. And so Sarah Ravito, who IEEE folks introduced me to, she was a WISE intern actually in 2007. And funnily enough, her topic was about voting standards. And so not only were we able to chat so much about that, and she was so helpful in my project, but she had a similar, or at least a career path that I would one day like to follow. She worked as an engineer, and then she went back to school, and then was actually IEEE's congressional fellow. And so hearing from her, and then also just the other folks that Eric and Russ have introduced me to that are interested in, the technology corporate space. And it's interesting that, like, juxtaposition, you think of maybe like Silicon Valley working very fast and becoming almost this de facto government, because the technology is just so rapidly progressing, and there aren't enough policies that have caught up to that. And so the people that are thinking of that, from a policy lens, I know Eric introduced me to Ajit, who works with Apple in DC, and he actually talks about the standards. So yeah, I guess that will always be a trend where government has to catch up to technology. And hopefully I can find where I want to fall in that space. But yeah, that's been very helpful for myself.
Sarah is also one of the more impressive members that has come out of the WISE program over the years. She's a wonderful human being as well.
She is.
So you guys invested a significant amount of time in your work in the WISE program itself. Was it worth it? As you look back with a little bit of distance, is this something that you would do again?
For sure. Definitely. It's unfortunate we could not be in DC, of course, because COVID. I love the city. I've been there a handful of times, either for vacation, volunteering, whatever it is. It's a great place. The program itself also taught me so much about cybersecurity and policy in general. My work is in photonics and optics in my PhD. So I didn't really know about cybersecurity. I was always interested in it, but kind of from an outside observer. So having the chance to really delve into the policy and what was being done in the cybersecurity field was outstanding. Talking with a lot of the cohort, you meet some great people. I mean, Kat and Shruti are just a small subset of everybody else that was there and I met. The other interns were great to talk to, really helpful. The IEEE contacts from Erica, Russell, other people, great people. Hopefully I'll continue the conversation with them. But overall, it's just an outstanding opportunity to write about a topic, study a topic that I'm interested in, and be able to have a piece of work that I'm proud of, that I can be like, hey, this is what I did. This is really important to me, and kind of share that with people that hopefully can make more of an impact than just one summer.
That is the goal. One of the purposes of the program. Shruti, I think I cut you off there, sorry.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with everything Nate said. I mean, yeah, I think we had talked about this earlier, if IEEE WISE was to be virtual again? Should, you continue the program? Would we do it again? I mean, I personally would do it again. In a way, obviously, there are so many things that we think of that we, missed out from an in-person experience, but in a way, we also gained so many, I don't know if Kat or Nate, you would have done it if it wasn't virtual this year, because almost, having more of a hybrid solution where people can still participate, even if they're not living in DC for the full summer, opens so many more opportunities. I know some of the other interns from the cohort were, just for whatever reason, not able to come to DC this summer. And so I think for me personally, this was incredible still virtually. And I know that now every time I'm in DC, I have people I can visit and I can, go to the IEEE office. So hands down would do it again. And it was an amazing opportunity.
I would agree with that. I mean, obviously it would be cool to be in DC, but WISE is not about a place, it is about the people. And I really think that we got to have that experience in full.
Actually, I think that's true of policy in general as well. The place is not important, the people are. And Kat, before we close, I wanted to circle back to something you said a second ago that I think needs to be repeated, which you complimented the folks at the Library of Congress. We work with all different parts of the government at IEEE-USA, and hands down, the Library of Congress is one of the best that we work with. The people there are genuinely interested in helping people, genuinely interested in working with their interns every year. And they get to work in one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. And so next time you guys are in DC, we have to take you to actually see the library, which is fantastic. Before we wrap things up, any advice? You guys have all commented on the kind of unusual perspective that you bring to your career of looking at the intersection between the technology and the policy. There are lots and lots of other engineering students out there that are thinking about this, that are aware of the opportunities, but don't really know what to do about it. Any advice for those folks on how to get more active and more acclimated to this particular world? Kat,
I guess
yeah.
Oh,
Go
ahead. Sorry.
Trudy, go ahead. Sorry.
I just had like a small kind of piece of advice. So obviously apply to WISE, like that is what you should do in the beginning. But if you're able, but I think, a lot of people wonder, what if I can't do an internship? And I had this question myself because I had come to the realization I wanted to do more about policy, more with policy towards the end of my senior year. And if I hadn't found WISE, one piece of advice I had received was just try to be more, more of like this active or vocal citizen. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people have blogs, and that's just like the simplest way you can, see legislation being passed or see something happening in your community and just like have this platform and express your opinion. And over time, I think that'll evolve into, you can get involved with your local government or, fundraising or whatnot. But I think that's like, the easiest way as a student, when you feel kind of helpless, just like talking about what your opinions are.
And on top of that, just start reading. There's so much out there, from years and years of legislation, articles talking about legislation, people in legislation talking about their own legislation, like anything you can think of. It's out there, and getting a perspective on what has been done, what has worked, why it's worked, why has it not worked. If you're interested, you'll find the information and be able to read it. So just start somewhere. WISE is great to kind of help focus some of that, but it's not necessary for someone that wants to get involved and really cares about policy.
They're engineers as well. You're definitely not alone. I think a lot of engineers care somewhat about policy, but just might not necessarily know how to get involved themselves. So you might know a little bit about something, they might know a little bit more about something else. And so between the two of you, you can start branching out in that respect. IEEE also has a number of societies and organizations that you can join. I know there's a particular advocacy organization relating to artificial intelligence that I'm trying to get involved with. So that's a way that with other engineers, you can help make your voice and your ideas known.
And that ultimately is the purpose of IEEE. It's to help engineers work together to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. I want to close by turning to something that Shruti said a little while ago, which is that she hoped that in the future more engineers would run for Congress and put themselves in positions to influence the policy world. That is kind of one of the long-term goals of the WISE program, is to encourage you to take your interests in directions and to heights that perhaps you would not have otherwise been able to. And whether that is running for public office or working for Congress, which we've had a number of WISE graduates do, or simply as Shruti, again, I think you said a moment ago, being an active citizen in the United States. It is one of the joys that the staff has watching our WISE interns move on to whatever it is you end up doing, to see how you incorporate what you've learned and been able to do into making your lives richer and more useful as you move on. With that, I want to thank Erica Wasalik, who is my colleague here at IEEE-USA and who runs the WISE program. Also thank Kayla Henneberry, who is our Genius Policy Associate, who's providing technical support for us today. Kat, Shruti, Nate, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us this summer. It was a joy to get to know each one of you, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for listening in.